I'm going to talk about how the idea of states started. So, the Western Sahara was considered a sovereign state by most African countries. Morocco and the Sahrawi Republic split the Western Sahara by the Polisario Front. No resolutions have really been made till now. And then, so next, the South Pole is the largest landmass that is really not considered a state, and the Antarctic Treaty and Law of Sea make up the legal framework for claiming Antarctic land. But for the most part, claims are overlapping and conflicting, so are overlooked by most countries. And the idea of states started in the Fertile Crescent, which formed an arc between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean. The first state was a city-state, which is a sovereign town and a surrounding countryside. And then the first political unity was really the Roman Empire, which had 38 provinces. And when it fell, it fragmented into many estates held by nobles, and this was the basis of development for all of Europe. It consolidated into the Austrian, French, Ottoman, and Russian empires, and a nation-state is a state ran by one ethnicity. This nation-states formed because of self-determination, which is a desire for self-rule. And then in the early 20th century, Europe was really mostly nation states because after World War I, Isaiah Bauman drew borders in Europe according to language because it was like a king's order. And then finally, after World War II, Germany split into two countries until 1990, and then after they met a resolution, they're called the German Federal Republic.
Oh, hey, how's it going? I'll start things off with sovereignty. A nation obtains sovereignty when it's independent from control of internal affairs by other states. An example of a sovereign state would include Australia. Moving on to microstates. Microstates are states with very small land area. There are about 24 across the world. Some include San Marino, Vatican City, and Monaco. Next up, we'll talk about the United Nations, also known as the UN. The UN is a group of nations that promote international cooperation to combat global economic problems. The UN was formed at the end of World War II by the victorious Allies. Finally, I'll be addressing the geopolitical divides that have occurred in Korea. Korea was divided into two occupation zones by the US and the Soviets after the defeat of Japan. Korea was divided along the 38-degree latitude line. Then, North Korea invaded the South in 1950, starting the 3-year war between them. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Logan, and I'm here to talk about multinational states and nation states. Multinational states are states that have more than one ethnicity. Nation states are states whose population is mostly dominated by one ethnicity. Multinational states occur in almost every part of the world. Nation states, however, are far less likely to occur, and most of these nation states are former Soviet states who gained their independence during the fall of the Soviet Union. At this point, many of them are in turmoil with them and their surrounding nations.
Hello, and welcome to Christian's A Pure World of Wonders. Today we're going to be talking about colonialism. Now, what is colonialism? Colonialism is the effort by one country to establish settlements and impose its policies on another territory. Now, the three main reasons for colonizing are God, glory, and gold. The two main colonizers are the UK and France. The UK had colonies all around the world, on every continent to be exact. Now, France, on the other hand, they only had some colonies in the Caribbean, West Africa, and Southeast Asia. All these colonies tried to keep very close ties with their colonizers, and even had elite groups to keep in contact with them. Although after World War II, a lot of them became independent and saw no affiliation with their colonizers. Now on to our next topic, the remaining colonies. There are only 68 remaining colonies in the world today, most of which are in the Caribbean. The most populous is Puerto Rico, which is controlled by the US. The least populous is Pitcairn, which is controlled by the UK. The State Department lists colonies that aren't necessarily colonies anymore because they gained their autonomy, such as Greenland, which gained its autonomy from Denmark.
My name is Nathan Crosby, and I'll be covering the types of boundaries. A boundary is an invisible line that marks the extent of a state's territory. There are two types of boundaries: physical boundaries and cultural boundaries. Physical boundaries coincide with the significance of the natural landscape. Cultural boundaries follow the distribution of cultural characteristics. A type of physical boundary is a mountain, which is difficult to cross and sparsely inhabited. There are two types of cultural boundaries: geometric and ethnic. Geometric is made up of straight lines, and ethnic separates different ethnic attributes such as language and religion. Alright, hi, my name is Nathan Crosby, and today we'll be going over the shapes of states. To do that, we're going to bring in a guest speaker. His name is Bradford Dixon. He specializes in all this stuff. So let's get right to it.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, yo, I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
That's good. So we heard that you specialize in shapes of states. So we thought to bring you in, and let's get right to it. Can you tell us what exactly shapes of states are?
So the shape of a state is the length of the boundary and the shape of the boundary with other states. So that can affect the communication, conflict, transportation, and all of that stuff inside of a state.
All right. Well, what types of states are there, or what are they called, or what are they?
So there's 5 shapes of states, and there are one situation called landlocked states. So there's compact states, which are very efficient. So that means the distance from the center to any boundary doesn't vary significantly. So it's near a perfect circle with the capital in the middle.
Right.
That's the most ideal, but like that, nothing's perfectly compact. Then there's elongated states. So there's potentially isolation that goes on in that state. So it's a long, narrow shape. So parts of the state are isolated from the capital. There's corrupted states. So it's a compact state with a large projecting extension. So that extension can be access to a resource or to separate 2 states, but that corruption can also be potentially isolated.
Right.
Corrupted state's kind of like a compact state with like an elongated state, a smaller elongated state mixed in with it. And then there's perforated states. So that's like South Africa and Lesotho. So it's a state that completely surrounds another one. So South Africa completely surrounds Lesotho. So the inside state depends completely on the outside one for resources and all this other stuff. So then there's fragmented states, which can be very problematic. So that includes several discontinuous pieces of territory. There's problems with maintaining communication and unity. So the fragmented pieces can be offshore islands. So they can be separated by water, or they can be separated by other states. Then there's also landlocked states, which is a situation some states are in where there's no direct outlets to the sea, which has benefits, but it can also, the benefit is you cannot get attacked by sea, so you only have the land. And but they're also, you can't trade through the ocean, or you have to go through another country to trade through the ocean.
All right. So thanks for covering that. While we're on the topic of this, can we ask you about the law of the sea? What is the law of the sea?
So in the late 18th century, some states recognized the territorial limit of 3 nautical miles from the shore of the ocean. And progressively that's extended. So the law of the sea, signed by 158 countries, makes territorial limits for most countries at 12 nautical miles. But under the law of the sea, states have exclusive rights to fish and other marine life under 200 nautical miles from the shore.
All right, well, that covers everything we need to know today. Thanks for coming in.
Of course.
All right.
Hi, my name is Bradford Dixon. Today we will be covering governing states, and I'm going to bring in an expert, Nathan Crosby, to tell us all about it. Let me try to get him on the line right now. Hi. So I hear you're an expert in governing states, so I have a few questions.
All right.
What type of government? Okay, what type of governments are there in states?
Well, there's 2 types. There's national and local.
So what role does the national government and local government play in the states?
Well, the national one determines how much power the local governments have, and then the local ones make up how the states are governed.
So how many types of national governments are there? And can you tell me what each one does?
Sure thing. There's three types. There's democracy, autocracy, and anocracy. Democracy is a state in which citizens elect the leaders and can run for offices. Autocracy is when a state that is run accordingly to the interests of the ruler, not the people. And then anocracy is a state that is not fully democratic or autocratic, but displays a mix. So it's between both the people and the ruler.
Okay, so how does a country get classified as democratic, autocratic, or anocratic? Like, what things make it, like, what elements make it classified as one of those?
All right, well, sure. There's three main ways. There's the selection of leaders, there's citizen participation, and the checks and balance system.
So out of the democracy, autocracy, and anocracy, which one is more dominant around the world today?
Dominantly, democracy.
And so in a state, whether it's democratic, autocratic, or anocratic, who distributes the power?
Well, it's not who, it's more like the way or how the state does. So there's a unitary state and a federal state. And the unitary state places most of the power in the central government, while the federal state allocates strong power into each of the local governments it has.
Okay, thank you. That's all we need.
All right, thanks for having me.
All politics must follow legally prescribed rules. Most parties will try to break and bend these rules for their own personal gain.
The way they do this is through gerrymandering, which is the process of redrawing legislative boundaries for the purpose of benefiting the party in power. However, it is illegal.
There's three main ways that gerrymandering occurs: wasted vote, excess vote, and stacked vote. Wasted vote spreads the opposition supporters across main districts in the minority. So that means, say if the red party has a minority and the blue party has a majority, the red party will make sure to spread out the blue party as much as possible so the red party can get as many electoral districts as possible. Then there's excess vote, which concentrates opposition support in a few districts. So the blue party would just make sure that the red party has a few amount of districts as possible. Stacked vote, which links distant areas of like-minded voters through oddly shaped boundaries. So as the blue and reds are spread out, the blues will try to just curve their map to make sure that they can get as much blue as possible to make sure they win that district.
Hello, my name is Ava Wilson, and I'll be giving you a live report on the Cold War competition and alliances.
This is the news at 6.
During the Cold War, many states joined regional military alliances. The world divided among alliances, and from this emerged two superpower states, the Soviet Union and the United States. They both had military bases in other countries and were not afraid to use military force to keep their allies from becoming too independent. After World War II, the balance of power between the US and Soviet Union was bipolar because they both had so much power over any other states. Thus, the states divided under each superpower's influence. For example, Europe was dominated by two military alliances. One of them was NATO, or North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and this was under the United States leadership, and their objective was to keep the Soviet Union from overrunning West Germany and other states. The other alliance was the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, and their objective was to protect each other. Warsaw Pact has disbanded, but the NATO is still running strong today with new members. On another note, there was a lot of tension between the two superpowers as they were both fighting for the most power. For example, in 1962, when the USA caught the Soviet Union secretly constructing missiles in Cuba. Economic alliances were also formed during this time. The two major alliances in Europe were the EU and Comecon. The EU was originally created to heal Western Europe's scars from World War II, but today their objective is to promote development through economic and political cooperation within their member states. Comecon was the Eastern Communist states and any other states they had power over. Comecon's goal was to promote trade and the sharing of natural resources. Comecon disbanded with the fall of communism, and the EU is the main economic alliance over Europe today. Europe tried to integrate all the states under one concept, the Eurozone. The Eurozone is the idea that one bank, the European Central Bank, would manage all the states under one currency, the euro. 23 states have adopted the Eurozone. Thank you so much.
This is Marley Maggio coming to you live to tell you about terrorism and the countries that have been involved with terrorism over the past several years. Audio. Terrorism is the systematic use of violence used to intimidate a country or to coerce a government into granting demands. Characteristics include achieving goals through organized acts that spread fear and anxiety throughout a population, viewing violence as a way to bring attention to your goals, or believing in a cause so strongly that they're willing to die during the acts. In modern times, terrorism is usually a group acting outside of its government, although a government may supply financial or military support to a terrorist group. Not all assassinations are terrorist attacks. For example, neither the Lincoln nor the Kennedy assassinations were terrorist attacks. Terrorism is different than acts of political violence because political violence is not aimed at the average civilian, whereas terrorism and terrorists view all civilians as responsible. Some terrorists were American citizens operating alone or with a group of others. For example, Theodore J. Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, killed 3 people and injured 23 by sending bombs through the mail. The most dramatic attacks on the U.S. were on September 11, 2001, when the Twin Towers and the Pentagon were hit by planes. The attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 fatalities. This act was carried out by a group known as Al-Qaeda. This group was also responsible or implicated in most of the anti-U.S. terrorism during the 1990s. This group was funded by a man named Osama bin Laden around 1990 to unite opposition fighters in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda is not a single unified organization, and the number of people involved are unknown. Al-Qaeda encompasses local franchises that deal with local concerns. For example, Jamaat al-Islam is a franchise concerned with establishing fundamentalist Islamic groups in Southeast Asia. Their attacks have been concentrated in Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country. Al-Qaeda's use of religion to justify violence has made it difficult for some Muslims to disagree with U.S. policies without seeming to have terrorist intents. Several states in the Middle East have provided support for terrorism by providing sanctuary, developing weapons or money, knowledge, and planning attacks involving terrorists. Afghanistan and probably Pakistan have provided sanctuary for terrorists involved with Al-Qaeda. Afghanistan was attacked by the U.S. when its leaders, the Taliban, sheltered bin Laden and other Al-Qaeda terrorists. Taliban gained power in 1995 and imposed strict Islamist fundamentalist laws. It was especially harsh on women. They couldn't attend school, work outside the home, seek healthcare, or even drive a car. Women were allowed to leave home if they were fully clothed and escorted by a male relative. The Taliban's rule ended when it was defeated by the U.S. in order for the U.S. to go after Al-Qaeda leaders. Pakistan, the war on terrorism spilled into Pakistan from Afghanistan, and Pakistan was also largely controlled by the Taliban. Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden in a compound in the city of Abbottabad when it was only 15 miles away from the capital. The U.S. believes that Pakistan security had to have known that bin Laden was living there for at least 5 years. The compound was heavily secured and it was only 4 miles from the Pakistan Military Academy. Pakistan officials were upset that the U.S. invaded without their knowledge. We also know that Iraq and Iran have been accused of supplying material and financial support to terrorists, although their levels of involvement are controversial. The U.S. led an attack against Iraq to depose Saddam Hussein because he had created biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction that could fall into the hands of terrorists. Although Hussein's behavior has raised concerns throughout the world since he became president, most countries didn't support the U.S.'s 2003 attack or the U.S.'s assumptions that Hussein had close links with Al-Qaeda. Hussein accused Iran of harboring Al-Qaeda members and trying to gain influence in Iraq. Problems also arose from Iran's nuclear program. Prolonged negotiations were taken to dismantle the group without causing another war. The government of Libya was accused of sponsoring a 1986 bombing of a nightclub in Berlin that was popular with the U.S. military personnel stationed there. But Libya renounced terrorism in 2003 and is no longer considered a state sponsor for terrorism. Thank you for listening to my report.